Hello everyone, and welcome again to my channel. This time we're going to have Jack present the information. It's going to be taken from the April 2018 Watchtower, and I'm going to talk about the article From the Way to True Freedom. But before I start that, I want to draw attention to the postcard that I have here, because recently there's been an 8th member of the governing body. However, that 8th member is actually Gilbert Gonzalez, GG for GB, not Kenneth Cook. Kenneth Cook is a pretender. So GG, thank you for being the first apostate member of the governing body. We appreciate that. So let's talk about the way to true freedom. This article starts on page 3 of the Watchtower. And the April 2018 Watchtower proves to be a treasure trove of misinformation, which we will now discuss. So in paragraph 2, they quote Ecclesiastes 8 verse 9, which says, "Man has dominated man to his harm." I could not agree more thoroughly with that, and I intend to utilize this video to demonstrate how the Watchtower is the ones that are fitting that position of dominating people to their harm. However, they're trying to act as if they're representing God, and we will discuss that. So paragraph 3, they quote James 1:25, "The one that peers into the perfect law that belongs to freedom and continues in it will be happy in what he does." So in this video, I'm going to argue from the standpoint of the scriptures. So we'll take their position, but what I'm going to show is how they do not actually do what the scriptures are saying. So I'm going to go down to paragraph 5 and demonstrate Watchtower's argumentation style is basically setting up a straw man for what they consider freedom to be and attacking that straw man. So the reason for setting up a straw man is because you cannot defeat the true argument. And you know this, so you set up a false argument. And the Watchtower does that repeatedly here. So in paragraph 5, they say, "Many today think that to be truly free, they must be able to do anything and everything they want to do, regardless of the consequence." That is an absurd argument. We all know that we're bounded by the laws of gravity, that we have physical conditions. None of us considers ourselves to have freedom to go and harm other individuals. That's not freedom, that's anarchy. So the Watchtower is setting up this false notion of what freedom is to begin to construct their argument. And when you do not have a truthful argument, you are forced into doing this. You are forced into using propaganda. So right away in the discussion of freedom, the Watchtower goes to their age-old tactic of propaganda. They set up a false argument and they attack that. They continue their style of absurd argument, as I pointed out in paragraph 7. It says, "For example, our first parents knew that to keep on living, they had to breathe, eat, sleep, and so on." So this is not an argument about what true freedom is, but this is an absurd argument. None of us considers freedom to involve the freedom not to breathe, not to eat, and not to sleep. Those are absurd things that are beyond our limitations and are not true freedom. That's idealistic thinking, kind of like hoping that you stumble upon a unicorn. So this is an absurd argument. The Watchtower also, though, wastes no time in pointing out what freedoms the Bible says that you have, but they also show you how they will look down upon you if you utilize the freedoms the Bible gives to you. For example, paragraph 8 says, "Today it is not against Jehovah's will for people to choose to be single or to be married but remain childless. Still, by and large, people marry and raise children in spite of the challenges such choices bring." So what they're doing here is they're letting you know that they look down upon Jehovah's Witnesses having children. Why? Because they want Jehovah's Witnesses to spend all of their time doing things that will increase the organization. And what they're doing here is saying if you exercise the freedom the scriptures allow you to have, because the Watchtower goes beyond the scriptures and because they're a bunch of men dictating rules, they will look down upon you for exercising your scriptural freedoms. So here they waste no time in letting you know that they frown upon having children. Which, just as a side note, had I decided to have children in my early 20s, by now those children would be well into their high school careers and perhaps ready to get out of high school. So my following of their advice proved to be disastrous to me. So, next, moving on to paragraph 12. They continue with their absurd argumentation style. They talk about a pilot flying an airplane. They say to reach a certain destination safely, he usually must follow a prepared flight path. Yes, if a pilot wants to reach their destination, they have to follow a flight path. This is the way things work. So they're trying to say if the pilot did whatever he wanted, he wouldn't reach his flight path safely, and that would be him exercising his freedom. But that's absurd. That's the same thing as saying if you want to drive a car somewhere, you have to follow the roads to get there. Now, none of us would think that we can get to where we're going by driving our car through trees. This is an absurd argument. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to give you the idea that true freedom is absurd, and this is not correct. So this straw man argumentation of absurd freedom versus real freedom is continued throughout the article. What they're trying to tell you is if you have freedom, you are going to make stupid choices. What they're trying to tell you is you need the Watchtower to make your choices for you. This is what they're trying to establish by their absurd argumentation. Truly, this is propaganda at its finest. And this proves they have no interest in truth, they merely have interest in having people follow them. They want to control people. So paragraph 13, they continue their absurd argumentation. They say the reality is that having unbounded freedom is a two-edged sword. So here they're conflating freedom with the rule of law. Rule of law is necessary because none of us has the freedom to go and injure anybody else. That is not freedom, that is anarchy, that is violence. So again, this is absurd argumentation, and they continually try to muddy the waters and confuse the subject and establish their straw man of absolute freedom to have no bounds at all versus the freedom that's provided by following their rules. So this is propaganda. So continuing, paragraph 15 says that the freedom that Jesus promised his disciples is far superior to the social or political freedom that most people yearn for today. So the point I want to focus on here is that once again I will argue from the standpoint that this is correct. So we're talking about the freedom that Jesus promised his disciples, but we have already seen an example whereby the Watchtower has decided to restrict the freedom that Jesus provided to his followers. So they are here arguing against themselves because they do not want you to have the freedom that Jesus promised his disciples, but they want you to be enslaved to their version of the scriptures. Again, paragraph 16. So Jesus' statement, if you remain in my word, implies that there are certain requirements or boundaries for being set free by him. So this is by Jesus, not by the Watchtower. The next sentence. As dedicated Christians, we have disowned ourselves and have chosen to live within the bounds of Christ's teachings as his disciples. So those are the bounds of Christ's teachings, not the teachings of the Watchtower, which we have already demonstrated the Watchtower goes above and beyond the teachings of the Bible. They add extra things. The Watchtower is restricting the freedom that Jesus Christ gave to his followers. I will now move on to the next article, Serve Jehovah, the God of Freedom. And in paragraph 1, they make an interesting point. It says at one point, some 30% of the population were slaves, talking about the Roman Empire. A historical fact is that in the past, vast majorities of the population were in fact enslaved. It's merely a recent development where slavery is a thing of the past. Slavery is a horrible blight upon the history of humanity, but nonetheless, in the past, it was something that was reality. Watchtower seeks to impose a different form of slavery on people, as I have been discussing. And here in paragraph 2, they ultimately use what is loaded language. So in paragraph 2, the middle, it says, rather than looking to any human ruler or agency for freedom, Paul and his fellow Christians worked hard to help others learn the good news of God's kingdom and the incomparable value of the ransom sacrifice of Christ Jesus. So there's a lot that's going on here. First of all, the Watchtower is saying that you should not look to any human ruler or agency for freedom, with which I concur. The problem is, they want you to look to the Watchtower, which is a human agency, and they want you to think that by doing what they say, that you indeed have freedom. This is patently false. On top of this, the Watchtower has made the term God's kingdom loaded language. When somebody who is a indoctrinated Jehovah's Witness sees God's kingdom, they instantly associate that with what they consider to be the earthly part of God's kingdom, which is the Watchtower. So, basically, the Watchtower is here utilizing the fact that they have indoctrinated witnesses with that loaded language to associate the good news with basically information about their corporation. To find out what Paul's really saying, you have to understand the words that he really meant. When Paul talked about God's kingdom, he in no way, shape, or form had the Watchtower in mind. He was talking about the rulership of God, not about a publishing organization that publishes magazines such as these, which are full of propaganda, loaded language, and false argumentation. Anyways, moving on. So paragraph 4 says, to enjoy and benefit from that freedom, however, we must turn to Jehovah. And again, this is loaded language. The Watchtower's own literature says that Jehovah is not the correct name for God. They have, however, taught you to associate Jehovah with the Watchtower. Therefore, whenever they use the name Jehovah, they are in fact referring to themselves. So for their argument here to be correct, they would have to say they must turn to God. And they don't use the term God because they want you to associate God with the organization, and they have purposefully built up that relationship to the name of Jehovah so that every time they say Jehovah, you think of the organization. Because in fact, the modern Jehovah is none other than the Watchtower. So, we're moving on to paragraph 9. The Watchtower again begins to restrict the freedom that the Bible grants Jehovah's Witnesses. They do this by talking about education. So they tell children, yes, you have the freedom to choose education. They say the world teaches you, and the world, of course, is always pejorative when used by the Watchtower. But if you get a good education, you are more likely to get a good job. And this is true. That's what the information shows. Depending on your choice of education, your chosen field, you can earn good money. There are, of course, college degrees that are completely worthless, and if you spend a lot of money to get a worthless degree, you are really not going to get a good job. So you want to make sure that you research degrees that are worth getting, and you pursue one of those degrees that coincides with things you like to do. If you like to do things that make money that don't require college degrees, perhaps such as some of the trades, then by all means pursue those things. But educate yourself as to what you can do to make money. And don't let the Watchtower tell you that getting an education is a bad thing to do. So in paragraph 10, they basically admit that people have the freedom to choose these things. And they even cite 1 Corinthians 10:29. Why should my freedom be judged by another person's conscience? The Watchtower admits that you have the right to make this decision. Then they say, well, it is true that we have the freedom to make personal choices regarding our education and career. We need to remember that our freedom is relative and that all decisions we make have consequences. So here the Watchtower is specifically telling you, if you exercise the freedom that you were granted by Jesus Christ, we will look down upon you and we will not favor you. So here, once again, they are showing you explicitly how they disagree with the scriptures. They're showing you that they want you to look to a man-made organization for your instruction and direction. And from this point on, they begin to switch to an argument of freedom through spiritual slavery to the Watchtower. In paragraph 12, they say the best way to protect ourselves from misusing our freedom and thus becoming enslaved again by worldly ambitions and desires is to be fully absorbed in spiritual pursuits. Spiritual pursuits in this context means doing things that are for the Watchtower and expand the Watchtower. That can include volunteering your time free of charge to build Watchtower facilities. It can involve volunteering your time free of charge to spread Watchtower literature, aka propaganda. This is the freedom and spiritual slavery argument. They're asking you to be slaves to them spiritually, and they're saying that's the only way to be free. And they persist in this argument throughout the remainder of this article. So those two articles on freedom in the April 2018 Watchtower on page 3 and on page 8 demonstrate to you the fact that the Watchtower well knows that they are restricting the freedom that Jesus gave to his followers. And they are setting themselves up as a man-made organization for you to follow, and what they truly desire is your slavery to them. So, if that slavery is something that you would like to have, well, that's your decision. But these are all things for you to think about, and thank you for watching.